Hello and welcome to News Weekly. In tonight's episode, we will discuss about the Western Sydney Airport and how its proposed construction impacts the economy of various markets. The development of a second Sydney passenger airport has been a long-running issue. A second airport in Sydney was first promised in 1946 and then again in 1986. It is proposed to be completed in 2026 and will be the second major airport in Sydney after the Kingsford Smith Airport. In March 2012, the joint study on aviation capacity in the Sydney region concluded that a second major airport facility would be required and that immediate steps should be taken to mitigate the long lead time of such a development. This view was broadly unanimous among the aviation and tourism industries. The joint study identified the Batchery Creek site in Western Sydney as the preferred option for a second Sydney airport. But does Sydney really need a second airport? Let us try to answer this question by analysing the demand for a second airport in Sydney and the benefits that the proposed Western Sydney airport will lead to. Let us cross over to Saurav to analyse the demand for a new airport in Western Sydney.
Thanks, Amulya. The air traffic in Sydney has seen on a gradual rise in the recent year and trend is likely to continue in future. The two main factors affecting the demand for a new airport in Sydney are the growing passenger movement due to population growth and international visitor growth. The joint study on the aviation capacity estimates that from 2027, there is likely to be a large-scale capacity issue at Kingsford Smith Airport due to significant growth of demand in both national and international aircraft movement. An average growth of 2.9% in passenger movement has been predicted in the Sydney region till the year 2060. The number estimates to reach 17.9 million international and 32.7 million domestic movement in 2020 to 62.7 million international and 82.9 million domestic movement in 2060. These numbers are overwhelming and support the idea of having a second airport in Sydney. The future demand for aviation in the Sydney region is also dependent on the international visitor growth. The two key growth markets are Indian and Chinese visitor. The Tourism Forecasting Council expects inbound tourism to Australia from China to increase at an annual average growth rate of 7.2% over the period to 2020. Indian arrivals are expected to increase of an annual average growth of 8.5%, the highest of all inbound markets. Given the large proportion of Western Sydney residents born overseas, the growth in the Indian and Chinese visitor arrival will be reflected in passengers volume in Western Sydney. We can now go across to Mohammed to understand the benefit of the Western Sydney Airport and its supply factors.
Thank you, Saurav. The airport is nationally significant infrastructure project that will generate economic activity both locally and nationally. Benefit will extend business and employment industry such as construction, utilities, trade, transportation, accommodation, retail, professional services, tourism, hospitality, and administrations. These benefits will have follow-on effect to individual through increased household income and greater access to employment opportunities. One factor affecting the supply will be employment. Western Sydney Airport will pursue a local employment targets including a minimum 30% employment from Western Sydney throughout construction phase and at least 50% of Western Sydney based employees from operation commencing in 2026. This airport is expected to support up to 11,000 jobs during its construction and up to 28,000 jobs in 2031, 5 years after opening. The government will be also looking to hire an engineering and property and construction firm to assist the costing and specification. Engineering and building talent, supply chain expertise, and project management skills are likely to be higher in demand. It is likely that these people with this talent will be attracted to the region in order to take the work, which would have sustained impact to the demographic and skills profile of that area.
Thanks, Mohammed. A second airport is needed to provide for the growing aviation demand of Sydney and will have several benefits. Industries that are heavily dependent on air transport are largely underrepresented in the Western Sydney region. However, these industries are present in the rest of Sydney and draw heavily on workers based in Western Sydney. Hence, a second airport located in Western Sydney would likely attract business to Western Sydney, closer to their labour force and air transport linkages. So we can fairly conclude that the construction of Western Sydney Airport will definitely be beneficial to the city of Sydney.